SaaS Backwards is sponsored by Austin Lawrence Group, specializing in demand gen for SaaS. It sure is noisy. I deleted 100 emails from vendors just this morning. Your buyer has gotten better at ignoring you, and you're gonna need a big idea if you want to cut through all that clutter. Austin Lawrence is just the right agency to help you find it. So if your campaigns are falling on deaf eyeballs, let's talk. Visit austinlawrence.com today and let's build something bigger.
Welcome to the SaaS Backwards podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, podcast that helps SaaS CMOs and CEOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Today we have a return guest. It's Guy Mounier, CEO and co-founder of Aptivio. We wanted to have Guy on today again because he's got some really unique insights around why CRO average tenure is an incredibly short 17 or 18 months. But before we get into that, I want to introduce Guy and give him an opportunity to talk about Aptivio. So welcome to the podcast, Guy. And before we launch into it, can you tell us a little bit about Aptivio?
Yeah, absolutely. So Aptivio, I often describe is a company that is almost 15 years in the making, even though we launched our product only 3 years ago. But I have a background in big data analytics. I have a background in unified view of the customer. Those are actually companies that ended up exiting and getting acquired. And it really led me to launch with my co-founder and CTO of Aptivio, which is essentially an AI platform for sales pipeline growth. And we took everything we've learned about monitoring what clients are doing and saying on the internet to figure out what they're thinking to help organizations and chief revenue officers in particular and sellers at large detect sales-ready opportunities, interested buyers, and warm intros. So that's essentially what we do. And we offer a free trial of that solution to prove the value.
Excellent. As we talked about as well in the pre-calls and other places, you've talked a lot about how CROs are under a lot of pressure today to really be capital efficient. And that's, of course, leading to their low tenure. But can you give us a little insight about what you see or where you've talked to CROs in your research of why they're under that pressure and why that tenure is so low?
Yeah, and the two are connected. And I often describe relatively short tenure of a CRO to a symptom tied to a much deeper root cause. And in fact, recruiters will help you recruit a chief revenue officers talk about it. They say it's going into an organization that is not CRO ready is essentially setting up a CRO to fail. So you can actually get to the root cause by simply talking to recruiters who I found do a fair amount of due diligence on an organization recruiting to a CRO to make sure that whoever they recommend will be set up to success. The job is hard enough, we all know, right, of growing the revenue, that you don't want to be set up in an environment where you're not going to fail. And where it often comes down to is an evaluation of performance visibility. So is there an infrastructure in place, both at each team level, call it sales, marketing, customer success, but also from a data and processes standpoint, you have a stack that is robust enough to cover your engagement funnel end to end from target to close and have that visibility that is sufficiently granular that you can double down on what's working and stop what's not working. Very often a CRO is brought in to accelerate that growth. And so they need to be in a position to understand that basic fact. You cannot do sales transformation without understanding where some of the problems are, right? Understanding the problem is, of course, 80% of the solution. So that level of visibility is what recruiters refer to when they talk about a CRO-ready organization.
Any insights into what a CRO-ready looks like? Like, what are the things that those recruiters are looking for to communicate to a CRO that, or a potential CRO hire, that this is a company that's pretty well set up or giving the visibility?
So when a recruiter engages with a CEO of a company and some of the members of the sales and marketing team, some of the questions they ask is about how the performance tracking is done. And really what they're looking for is they're trying to get a sense of how many motions are running. So the go-to-market motions, inbound, outbound, product-led, partner-led, community-led, also called customer-led, event-led, different motions. They're trying to get a sense of how are these motions doing in general. So they're trying to understand, are those run efficiently as optimally as they should? How many of them do you have running? Right? It's the concept of you're driving a car with 1 or 2 cylinder, or you're running on 4 or 6 cylinders. And so the number of motions that are running and running well, coupled with how efficiently those motions are run, is usually a very good indication of readiness for CRO. Because of course, if you know that the motion is running efficiently, it means that you're measuring it in the first place, and you're measuring how fast and how much, right? How many leads end up coming from that channel and converting into revenue, right? So-called revenue attribution to revenue by motion. So that's usually the kind of interviews that they ask. And then beyond that, ask a little bit of question on people and processes and technologies. But usually if they get good answers on outcomes, meaning number and output of those go-to-market motions, that's usually enough to know that the organization is scalable.
I'm wondering, has CRO tenure dropped recently, like in the last couple of years, because of changes in the economy, or has it always been a low tenure position? It hasn't been around that long to begin with, but I'm just kind of wondering if there was a difference when companies started tightening the purse strings.
I would describe it in 2 ways. One is the CRO function. Title can vary at times a bit. I've seen chief growth officer, chief go-to-market officers, but in general, it's a position, it's one of the fastest growing positions that we've seen in the market. I mean, VCs actually say that. We at Aptivio, because we sell to CROs, you have actually measured it. So we've looked at Google Trends, and we looked at the searches that are being done for that keyword of chief revenue officers and variations of it. And we've seen a growth of that research for this position increase 60% per year over the past 5 years. So it's definitely a very hot topic for organizations. And the reason why I mention it is because in our view, it's linked to the pressure that the companies are under to grow in a capital efficient way. And they do it by having a much more integrated, multi-cylinder go-to-market motion. And they need someone to supervise that transformation. There's usually a fairly significant amount of transformation to be done at the people, technology, process level. And that CRO is essentially the steward of that effort. Now, just like any other IT project, it's hard to talk about failure rate, but we know empirically that it's a double-digit percentage. And that's why we have this average of 17 months life expectancy for the CRO. What it really means is you have a normal 3-year tenure, which is kind of the average tenure as a CXO in a company, and then all the way down to 9 or 12 months where things are not working out. And so whenever a CRO comes in, they're really after those quick wins, demonstrating the quick wins of the transformation in the first 3 to 6 months. They really don't wait in that regard. And often what we see is if they don't succeed, or it's too hard to get that efficiency up or that transformation successful, they'll revert back to VP of sales mode and working on deals directly, et cetera, to justify the salary. So that's also a very common scenario. So I would say, again, it's empirical on our part, but I would say that probably half of CROs do not achieve the level of transformation that they expect or that was expected by their board. And so that's a spectrum of where you land in that window.
Where do you think the CROs are lacking visibility to be successful in a lot of those situations?
Well, to us, the blind spots for the CRO, I mean, we think of the blind spots in three ways, which is actually tied to how you accelerate the go-to-market. We think of it in terms of go-to ICP, go-to network, and go-to attribution. And so with the first one, it's the notion of focused growth. It's the notion of, do you have a deep understanding on where repeatable sale is happening in your market? And what are the so-called signals or criteria that make up a good customer? And good means good in terms of fit, good in terms of timing, right fit, right timing, and then high chance of closing. And so that ICP focus is key and not always in place. And that's often an effort, a transformation effort attached to that. The go-to network is another big one. We all know that accelerating connectivity into a market segment has to do with bridging your company's network more effectively. And that can simply mean leveraging existing customers more effectively for expansion. It can also mean leveraging a partner and investor network more effectively. So that's a second avenue of blind spot. And a third is attribution to revenue, which really comes down to performance. Do you have understanding of how well the different motions that you have are performing in terms of conversion and what you can do to improve it, whether it's improving messaging, whether it's rebranding the website, whether it's SEO, whether it's having a more robust and focused outbound motion. So having that understanding of the root cause of the lack of efficiency in that motion is obviously 80% of the solution there. So that attribution in many organizations is often not in place or with a set of metrics that are extremely hard to make sense of. So click-through rates without any context of our ICP clients clicking on the ads or clients that should not even be in the funnel, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, let's tear those apart just a bit, if you don't mind. So let's
Sure.
talk about opportunity detection, which I think was the first one. And I associate that with a lot of the ABM systems and third-party intent, where we're trying to figure out whether people are potentially entering the market. Can you talk about what some of the limitations are on those systems for CROs directly and where they are helpful, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so opportunity detection is indeed the name of the game, right? It's instead of the opportunity choosing you, you choose the opportunity by detecting who's in market, who's in your ICP, and you laser focus on them. The opportunity detection indeed started in the context of ABM and so-called also buying intent platforms. What we've learned with those platforms is they're somewhat effective at focusing your ad spend against in-market accounts and definitely demonstrate, you can show some better ROI, focusing of advertising spend, focusing on in-market accounts versus not. Just have a lot more granularity and understanding of where to spend. However, the impact and in terms of revenue attribution is, in our experience, not that great. There's two fundamental reasons for us. One is ABM platforms fundamentally are not sufficiently actionable for salespeople because they often focus at the company level and not the person level. And so you don't actually know who's doing the research, et cetera, which for a salesperson is obviously not very helpful.
I often train people that really, if you're not reaching out, doing outbound with some kind of context and relevance, it's just going to, buyers have just learned to ignore that. And so I think the holy grail, of course, is that we find somebody that has intent and that we're the first ones to find that, and that we can use that as intelligence to get into an account. However, if I don't know specifically who's doing the research or who's doing the intent, it really doesn't help me. I'm still guessing from the standpoint of trying to get a one-to-one conversation with somebody that matters in the organization, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it's tied to this entire debate about third-party data versus first-party data, is that at the end of the day, all you're trying to do as an organization, as a seller, is insert yourself in the conversation. If you can't be for sure certain that this is the person that visited your website, first party intent, or that this is the person that connected with a competitor on LinkedIn or liked their post, etc., then you cannot reach out to that person and use that fact as a way to introduce yourself. So what we found is that first party data trumps, to a point of like day and night almost, third party data. So you need to know exactly who's doing what and use that information, played back to them, saying, I noticed you visited this part of my website talking about these topics. We have a wonderful case study on that subject, which is exactly the same type of company you're in. Oh, by the way, looks like you're speaking to so-and-so in the market. This is how we differentiate. You have to play back at that level of granularity to strike a conversation with someone. That's where we are. This has now become, in our view, the new frontier, the new performance frontier. And so G2 is going to be introducing a quadrant on that called autonomous go-to-market. It's not out yet, but in short, it will be about detecting the level of intent at the first party level, the person level, and the ability to leverage that information to strike a conversation using AI agents and techniques of that nature to get that engaged lead that sellers really care about. So that's where we're going. So in our view, ABM was, if you will, a first generation intent platform at the company, third party data level. Let's not forget that the cookies are going away, right? The third party cookies, we're only keeping the first party cookie, which are functional cookies. So we're clearly moving to a world of first party data and person level intent. And this is quite clear. This is what's happening. And it's the new performance frontier.
Can you also talk about the deficiencies or the lack of visibility with account coverage? Like, for example, I didn't know someone in my network had a connection that I could have used to get into a particular opportunity, and now it's too late. What can be done about that?
Yeah, so account coverage, it's interesting because I used to work in a fintech, and at a personal level, I actually learned a lot about account coverage from banks and relationship management banks and corporate banks in particular, quite sophisticated in that regard. But account coverage is exactly what you described. It's obviously, we all understand this concept of buying committee and having a multi-threaded relationship with a client. There's an entire buying committee that's going to make this buying decision, and you make sure you're a champion and you're economic buyer and user buyer, et cetera, on board with the purchase. But you also need to build an influence map to understand who in your company's network can actually help influence an organization. And that can be as simple as a past customer, maybe who joined that organization in some capacity. It could be one of your investor happens to also sit on the board of that organization. And knowing that is obviously critical. And that's often a blind spot, both the identification of all the key stakeholders you should be in touch with, but also all the key influencers in your company's network that could help you influence that account. What we find is that there is often quite a bit of a blind spot. People are limited to their own personal network. They're going after an account and they're not aware of other ways their company could help them get into an account.
And the third area that I think you talked about was this area of like performance attribution. As a CRO, I don't have enough data or visibility into whether or not the inbound or outbound motions are working. How could you possibly start to get a handle on some of those motions?
It requires a very simple yet powerful framework to understand impact of what you do. And there are a number of consultants out there who are starting to talk about revenue journeys and revenue architectures. You're starting to hear those terms from various go-to-market consultants. In our case at Aptivio, the framework that we build directly on software essentially divides up your engagement funnel into a set of revenue stages. So, targeted, aware, engaged, with a client interested, and then you go into the forecast phase, which are the traditional pipeline, best case, committed, and then close one. So you have an engagement funnel. And the key is to measure the types of clients, So what are the ICP characteristics that make someone most likely to move forward in your engagement funnel? And what are the types of actions that you take that are most likely to convert from one stage to the next? So when you do revenue attribution to revenue, you can't just wait 6 months to know whether a deal is going to close or not. You want to know, did the action I take allow me to go from target to aware, from aware to engaged, et cetera. And you need to measure all your go-to-market motions, whether it's inbound, outbound, product-led, customer-led, event-led, against that unique framework. So you're not comparing apple and oranges. And so you understand the cost, you understand the conversion efficiency, you understand the ICP fit, and then from there you can assess how effective some of these campaigns, some of these signals, some of these AI automation that you're using are doing. So we're talking about ABM. If you look at ABM in that framework, you will clearly see an improved level of conversion at the inbound level. The issue is that on a cost per lead basis, it's way too high compared to other things that you can do in that motion or other motions. And so some of the decisions that you then make in your stack is, do I keep this solution? Do I replace it? Or do I double down in that approach? And you can only do that once you understand how each action you're doing is delivering in terms of capital efficiency. And this is what a framework that I described allows you to do. Obviously, easier said than done, which, we're circled back to the CL readiness. We've seen a lot of solutions emerge around RevOps automation and sales performance attribution to help you do that in a much more automated way. And that's precisely for the reason we described. It's an essential tool to be able to do any kind of transformation.
Can you give me a little bit of the backstory about founding Aptivio based on the research that you were finding, or where were you seeing the holes in the marketplace? And I think you mentioned that it was founded in 2019, so fairly recently.
Yeah, I mean, for us, when we started the company, interestingly enough, I've been in enterprise sales for the past 15 years. And what I started to see is more and more scientific ways, if you will, of selling starting to emerge. Some people would call it digital sales or remote selling. Some people call it ICP. Let's focus on your ICP. Others will start calling it intent, the right timing to reach their client. But there would be more and more scientific methods, scientific ways to focus on the right account, improve in a very cost-effective way the conversion in your engagement funnel and the speed as well of that sales cycle. And to us, that was intriguing. In my background, myself, my co-founder are big data engineers, literally fell in love with sales and empowering salespeople. And we got closer and closer to that problem statement that is definitely a hard one to solve. In our view, it has to be solved in a holistic way. And what I simply mean by that is, you really want to have a true significant acceleration. The reality is you need to address it end to end. You need to have multiple motions running, and these motions have to run efficiently if you want to see a real impact. And you can bring it down to very simple examples. I mean, you can implement a wonderful SDR outbound motion, and then all of a sudden, everything gets approached the same way. The reality is there will be accounts where partners will be much more effective at getting you into that account than any form of outbound motion that you're going to do, like cold calling that account. And so recognizing how to orchestrate your go-to-market motion the correct way for each account and buyer that you're interacting with is precisely the complexity that needs to be addressed in a go-to-market motion. And what we're starting to see is that access to data and the emergence of intelligent automation at the time, that's how it was called. It was not called OpenAI or ChatGPT. Felt like a big revolution was about to occur. And so we got a little ahead of it, but not a ton, just a few years ahead of what we're experiencing today.
And speaking of that, where do you see the biggest opportunities for AI to assist in that process?
I think a very simple answer is top of the funnel activity. I mean, if you think about capital efficiency, any kind of strategic solution requires pretty deep level of product knowledge and expertise to sell. And so a good salesperson is good at building relationship and closing deals. Very often, the top of the funnel activity is just not a good use of a salesperson's time. Yet in many ways, it still requires a salesperson attention. We find that sometimes pushing that to SDR teams that you don't fully control can be problematic. And so is it possible to have an AI agent that can help you outreach every buyer the same way you would, researching that client deeply, leveraging past interactions and leveraging that research to send a perfect message, but just doing it at scale? It turns out that the answer is yes now with AI. And we like to say it's not an AI SDR, it's an AI relationship builder, because it's something that will do top of the funnel. They're good sellers. And there's another top of the funnel activity, which in our view is equally important, getting more and more importance. It's the networking side of things. How you're systematically looking at your company's network to see if you have an angle to get into the account through an influencer. And more often than not, you'd be surprised on how much of a leverage you have through a network. We typically, once again, it's time consuming. You have to kind of ask around and figure it out. AI can help a lot, guessing from a data perspective, who in your company network could help, and then go and ask them, are you willing and able to help? And if they're willing and able to help, bring them to you for a discussion on how to approach the account together. That also is a significant impact. But in both cases, networking and personalized outreach, we think that this is where AI will have the most impact because it can make literally those two stages completely autonomous.
So last question, build me a vision of what it would look like for a CRO to use your system on top of a tech stack that they currently have in an organization.
So a lot of CROs are going for a fairly heavy rationalization of their tech stack. It turns out that a lot of features that used to be kind of pure play point solutions end up being part of the core kind of CRM platform these days. So in our view, in the future, 3 to 5 years from now, you'll have 2 types of platforms. You'll have your CRM platform that will cover all the needs related to lead and opportunity management. And you'll have essentially a go-to-market automation platform that will be responsible for lead and opportunity discovery. So in other words, monitoring the billions of data points per day outside of your CRM to figure out what your clients are saying and doing on the internet, and then bringing that intelligence into your CRM workflow. So we think that these 2 systems will be coexisting. You can think of this go-to-market automation platform essentially as the next generation sales intelligence, if you like, because it will be a combination of intelligence coupled with AI agents that will essentially do some of the top of the funnel activity I was describing for you. But that go-to-market automation platform will coexist with your CRM and will give you obviously visibility about where your opportunity white space is or blind spots and where your execution gaps are. We'll also tell you these are the motions that you need to optimize, whether it's the messaging or other aspects. And in many ways, will self-correct too in the process as well. So this is in our view, but the stack of the future, the sales stack of the future will look a lot simpler from a UI and user experience standpoint than it is today.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a good place to land. If people want to learn more about Aptivio or reach out to you, how can they do that?
Well, really simple. Go to our website, aptiv.io, see how the product works for yourself by requesting a free market snapshot for your own go-to-market. As far as reaching out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn. First and last name is my LinkedIn ID, Guy Mounier. So that's essentially it.
Tell me a little bit more about that market snapshot. I think that's pretty valuable for companies. What is that specifically?
Yeah, so the market snapshot, I mean, you can think of it as an automated market research report. What it does is it will, with very minimal input on your part, give you an assessment of your entire target account, total addressable market, how many accounts in market, and monitor them to identify who's in your ICP and who's already in market for your solution, including if they're interacting with direct competitors. What's great about that exercise is that it helps you quantify your opportunity white space. Well, first, when you do that, there's a whole bunch of ops you're going to recognize immediately. They're already in your pipeline, and a bunch of them that should be in your pipeline. So it's a wonderful way to quantify how much of a blind spot you have in the market. And then, of course, leverage that intelligence to capture those opportunities.
Fantastic. And just as a reminder, if you haven't subscribed yet to the SaaS Backward podcast, please do so wherever podcasts are distributed. You can also find links to our past posts at austinlawrence.com. Guy, thanks so much for a great episode.
Thank you, Jason, for having me.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempet at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.